You saw nothing.
I wish I saw nothing.
What I did see was like two baby birds feeding each other.
Turning Red, like all of Pixar's films, went through a huge development period. From a general idea to concept art to dropped plot lines, and even a few animation mistakes, we're taking a look at everything we could get our paws on. Number 1. Just like May was going through changes, so was the panda. May's red panda went through some pretty drastic changes in the film. Originally, the panda was going to grow and shrink, depending on how emotional May was. But this led to complications for the animation team when deciding how big to make her. Domishi said the more angry she'd get, the bigger and more feral she'd look. The size of the panda constantly changing was going to cause more problems for May, adding even more comedy to situations where she'd be too small or too big. Do you think there is any particular emotion attached to May's ears or tail popping out only? We're assuming it's just an anime thing. Inspiration? Inuyasha. In this concept art, it looks like the pandas also had fire powers. We can see why this would complicate the whole magical puberty thing just a bit too much. But there may have been remnants of the fire in May in this next bit of concept art. May can be seen with what's either blue smoke or fire coming out of her ears and tail. While we're pretty sure this idea was replaced with the poof of pink smoke, it's still pretty cool to see. And the spiral design that's a symbol of her great ancestor became limited to just her arms in the end, which we bet made animating her much easier. Number 2. We're glad they didn't destroy all of Toronto in this movie. You know how we were talking about May changing sizes? Well, Turning Red had an alternate ending, where May was going to grow to the size of her mom's red panda, and the two were going to tear up Toronto in an epic Godzilla-like battle. Pretty sweet, huh? Luckily, they pared that down to just Ming being gigantic, which minimalized the damage costs they would be on the hook to cover. Number 3. It's amazing how plots evolve. Because speaking of damage, there was an alternate plot altogether that the final scene of the movie showed of the family slowly paying off the Sky Dome. Before it became that scene, it was an entire plot in the movie, where Ming was the one encouraging her daughter to turn into a panda to raise money for their family temple. Of course, this manifested in more ways than paying to repair the Sky Dome. It also became the story of May raising money for Four Town tickets. Number 4. So, you come to me on the day of my daughter's wedding. Yes, there was indeed a gangster in Chinatown named Benny Blacktooth in the first draft of the screenplay. The temple had fallen onto hard times, and so they owed quite a lot of money to this Blacktooth character. Domishi admitted, the first version was so kooky, we just really went for all out, like a goofy, Stephen Chow-esque kind of screwball kind of comedy. But it wound up way too complicated. Domi brought this draft to a halt when she'd said, wait, we were talking about magical puberty. Why are there gangsters in this? They had done their research, talking to San Francisco Chinatown experts who discussed the warring Chinatown gangs. But we will admit, we're glad they took a different approach. It would have made the movie far less relatable. There was even this weird bit of concept art where 13-year-old Panda May was officiating at a gangster wedding. Number 5. This would have made for either a depressing story or a completely absurd one. Another abandoned draft focused far more on family and far less on May growing up when it took place at her grandmother's funeral. In this version, she would be meeting her extended family for the first time, meaning we would see so much more of all those kooky aunts we love so much in the film. In this draft, May and her mom have a rivalry against a cousin and an aunt who could still turn into their pandas. We're in love with the concept art for the little cousin who had a tail more like a raccoon. So at one point, it wasn't only the women of the family who turned into pandas. This story was scrapped for being too plot-focused and lost sight of May's journey through magical puberty. Number 6. Dropping the references that today's youth wouldn't understand was a good idea. Some of the names were changed as the plot of the movie developed. May was originally named Faye, and Four Town was called Boys in Streets. That's right, it was spelled with a Z, because that was the cool thing in the era of boy bands. That and all things numbers. There was at least 20 different titles for Turning Red too, from the notorious RPG meaning Red Panda Girl, a play on the name of the rapper, My Neighbor Toronto, a play on My Neighbor Totoro, PMS, Panda Mayhem Syndrome, you can figure that one out, Girl in Red, Panda Prime, Anything But Red, Big Deal, and Faye Lee and a Panda, to name a few. Number 7. Saving the planet one cutscene at a time. We completely lost one scene that was fully animated, that was included in the trailer and the making of documentary on Disney+. May and her friends were protesting to save the planet. In the making of doc, we lost this weird little moment of the girls flopping on the floor in an attempt to draw attention to their cause. This was most likely cut due to it not reflecting May's goody-two-shoes straight-A values. It was better to highlight how perfect she is in that she wasn't even attempting to disrupt the system. But that doesn't mean the environment isn't important, guys. Just that May doesn't seem like the type to protest. We do, however, see how it made it to completion before being cut. Number 8. The Beavers are not happy about this one. There was a quirky Canadian joke that wound up being replaced with a just as quirky triangle joke. Tragically, we lost the line, "Are you a beaver? 'Cause damn." And instead we got,
"Are you a triangle? 'Cause you were cute."
The geometry joke works fine, but we're still sad about it. Hey, maybe a red panda would be attracted to a beaver, who knows? And maybe that would take the magical puberty metaphor a step too far for a children's movie. Number 9. These are just the scrapped pages they were willing to show us. Some pages were drafted up for May's notebook that we never even got to see, including a page of Devon as a centaur, and all of May's friends dressed up as Sailor Moon characters. This bit was a nod to one of the major influences of the film. The anime style and pastel colors of Sailor Moon were the color palette they used in Turning Red. Another reference to Sailor Moon can be seen hanging on the wall in this concept art, including everybody's favorite number 2 character, Luigi with Toad. Not that we ever expected the characters to make it into the movie, given the IP isn't owned by Disney, but it's still cute to see. Did you know Domi Shi's parents still have some of her drawings that influenced the notebook scene? Number 10. It's like a light bulb. One day it's off, the next day we're obsessed. That's a pretty bad metaphor unless you're a moth. We can all relate to this one.
I didn't even like Fort Town last year, but now they're literally the greatest thing.
This scene, we imagine, was in the opening shot of the movie where May's narrating. If this was staged at her house, it makes sense to cut it, because, of course, Ming is not a huge fan of May's friend group.
Hip-hoppers. And why are they called Fort Town if there are 5 of them?
Number 11. And speaking of watching TV, there's also this sweet bit of concept art of May and Ming crying while holding each other and watching TV. We did get a truncated version of this in the movie, and there was no crying involved. Instead, they were sassing the poorly contrived plot of the show, leading to the assumption that they're watching some sort of soap opera. Number 12. Which makes for better character development? Only child syndrome or oldest child syndrome? And another deleted character. By the looks of it, in one draft, May had a baby sibling. This, most likely, was in a pretty early draft of the movie with the kooky aunts at the funeral. It added to the mother-daughter dynamic to have May be the only child, so she could be completely smothered by her mother's love and expectations, and not have that attention divided between another child. Although, it would have been added responsibility and expectations put on May, so perhaps they could have worked a sibling into the mix. Either way, not necessary. Number 13. We're going to get real for a second. Now, Disney has been going through some serious controversy this past bit over what's been going on in Florida, and it's theorized that there are LGBTQ+ scenes that have been cut out of Turning Red. Priya obviously has affections for the goth girl at the party, but their moments together are slim to none, and even downright jarring given there's just a tiny nod at the moment the two characters share. Pixar employees across the movies are frustrated and have been coming out to say that they have constantly been shut down trying to include more LGBTQ+ content. Number 14. Torontonians know best. We bet they pointed it out first. One mistake that wasn't caught until it was already released on Disney Plus was the Toronto streetcar. You don't need a steering wheel when the streetcar follows a track. The old streetcars just had buttons. Now the new high-tech ones have multiple screens, but still, no steering wheel. Number 15. Last time we checked, the superpower was to turn into a panda, not to conjure incense. There was also one wee mistake when Ming hands May incense sticks. Ming is holding 4 and she gives May 3. Then Ming is still holding 3. Number 16. We're refraining from making a joke about sight. When May's dad is making food, in true anime fashion, his glasses get steamed up. When he wipes them clean, he only wipes one lens, but suddenly both are clear.
Okay, well, thanks for listening.
So, the creative team had to make some hard choices, cutting out so much juicy stuff. But we have to say, we're glad they stuck with the plotline they did. There's no space for gangsters in this story. There was barely space for the kooky ants.
She won't hug me, ever, okay? She hates me.
Deep trauma, wild, raging fires, and a heartbreaking situation? We nearly had a significantly more emotional story in Encanto. We're covering the darker alternate endings that almost made it to the screen.
Bruno makes bad things happen.
Number 1. Time to get the tissues. Okay, so we did still lose Pedro in the film, but at one time, there was a possibility that it was so much worse. Abuela Alma's love was going to pass away at the river at the same time that Alma was giving birth to the triplets. Talk about devastating. At least in our version, Pedro got to meet and say goodbye to his children, and to be there to support Alma. Number 2. And then there was Alma. Knowing Pedro wouldn't have been able to meet his triplets is heartbreaking enough. But poor Alma would have faced an even more intense and tragic experience, being pulled between the joy of having her children and the heartbreak of losing the love of her life and her co-parent. Loss is never easy, but these moments happening at the same time could have made Alma's relationship with her children much more difficult. Number 3. You never know what you'll find when you go to a place you used to call home. At one point in the development of the movie, Mirabel was seen running away from the city, meaning Abuela had to go back to the place she'd run away from to find her. When back in town, she'd stumble upon a mural dedicated to her love Pedro, with this quote, "To love at all is to love entirely." And if that weren't emotional enough as it is, Abuela Alma was going to stay by the mural's side all night long. Eventually, after finding Mirabel, we discovered the truth as Abuela shared what had kept her walls up.
After I lost him, I was so afraid. I couldn't bear the thought of losing anyone else.
Number 4. So many apologies, so little time. Understanding why Abuela was hurting so much led to a different apology that involved her explaining that her deep-rooted fear of the miracle actually made her forget who the miracle was for. Abuela also carried the blame for Pedro's death, feeling that it was because she left the city that she lost him. And while it would have explained why she was so scared of losing anyone else, this heartbreaking turn would have wrecked us. Number 5. Fights between family members can get pretty vicious. While it was Abuela and Mirabel that faced tough conflict together, an alternate ending saw Mirabel and her mother Julieta having a brutal and heartbreaking argument, one that would upset Mirabel so much that Casita would fall to ruins as a result of it. Number 6. This house is on fire. Yikes. Flames nearly took down the Casa Madrigal, and what was left was meant to be a deeply haunting image. There was an alternate end that saw Casita burn to the ground, an especially painful turn of events considering the candle was what kept it going for so long. After the tragic burning, a haunting scene would have taken the place of the beloved Madrigal home. Only doors and windows left floating among the ashes, with an especially dark and kind of threatening-looking spirit left in the rubble, which was meant to be the remaining cracks of the house. Going this dark would have made for a very different feeling than what we got. Number 7. Someone call the doctor. Possibilities for how Casita could suffer were extremely varied, and one alternate storyline for Casita saw it showing signs of illness physically. Storyboards that didn't make the cut show the paintings and photos hung up on the walls of Casita going blank, a sign that the home was experiencing a kind of brain fog. At one point, even the yellow butterflies went dark. Seeing such a major loss and darkness in the house would have made the concern for Casita's deterioration way more intense in the end. We hate to see Casita hurting.
You got this. Just gonna save the miracle.
Number 8. There's a new patriarch in town, and his name is Agustin.
Agustin.
In another version of the film, Agustin was the one who decided to build the Madrigal home, even after being warned specifically not to. This man was very different from the one we got to know. To paint a bit of a picture, he had a mustache at the age of 4. Knowing that, it's not too surprising that even after a mysterious woman gave him an intense warning not to build the house, he opted to go against her advice. This certainly doesn't sound like the Agustin we know and love, and we would have gotten quite a different movie if this had been the reality. Number 9. You never know what you'll find in a river. If you thought Casita was magical, this river is next level. An alternate storyline saw Mirabel need to find her abuela. How did she do it? By following the magical river, which would have in actuality been Abuela's hair. The journey Mirabel took would have seen her exploring more of Alma's origin story and journeying through her past, uncovering all the trauma and heartache she'd had. This detail and seeing just how long and deep that river was would have brought a much more intense vibe to the film, highlighting the true depth of Abuela's sorrow in this case.
This river is where we were given our miracle.
Number 10. It would have been an ugly sight. Sisters can fight, there's no doubt about it. But one version of Encanto saw a pretty intense scrap between Isabela and Mirabel. That's right, we almost saw these two totally duking it out. But it just didn't feel right to see that kind of violence in their relationship, so the team decided to scrap it. Who would have guessed the fights that we got were the toned-down versions?
The only thing you have ever done for me is mess things up! Nothing is messed up!
Number 11. There were other options. And they were shockingly different from the oh-so-suave Mariano. Isabela had her eyes on a different character, one we never got to meet, named Bubo Marquez. This suitor was meant to be a man from the city with a modern and unique style to those in the village, meaning he stood out quite a bit. Oh, and in terms of personality, this guy was meant to be quite the goofy dork, which no doubt would have made for some fun moments. Number 12. Chispi the capybara almost wound up stealing the scene. While many alternate storylines in Encanto made for a much darker ending, there was one post-credits scene that was cut that ended on a much funnier and perkier note. The beloved Chispi the capybara wound up being drenched by CASITA, an adorable and hilarious scene that luckily did wind up being released later on.
Wait a second.
Raya the warrior is here, but she almost faced a much darker ending in the film. Raya and the Last Dragon hit us in all the right feel spots, but knowing that certain characters almost didn't return has us completely rethinking what the movie could have been.
My girl Raya and I are gonna fix the world. Bring everyone back.
Had Disney chosen to go with their much darker alternate ending, Sisu truly would have been the last dragon. In the ending we saw, Sisu and all her dragon siblings return, but it turns out that there was a potential we wouldn't see any of the dragons ever again. The reason they considered this ending is that it would have reinforced the idea that Sisu couldn't just sweep in and solve all the problems. It was up to people trusting each other and working together to overcome hardship. Considering that reasoning, we can understand how impactful a message the alternate ending would have given. The debate was a long and tough one, as the creators didn't want to forgo the message they wanted to reach audiences, but in the end, they decided they wanted to bring a happy ending to the screen. The mystical ending we see in the movie is actually more authentic from a cultural perspective. We're so glad they chose to embrace that, both out of respect for the cultural ethos, as well as the fact that it would have been heartbreaking to lose Sisu forever.
Well, compliments to the chef.
We loved seeing Elsa's portrayal of the fifth dragon. Oh wait, we meant Sisu. Sisu is the fifth dragon. Elsa is the fifth spirit, of course. Though that's not all the two films have in common. Remember that dark alternate ending we were just talking about? Well, the alternate ending from Frozen 2 was eerily similar. Elsa, who also looks extremely similar to Sisu, for a dragon and a human anyway, nearly passed away forever as well. The endings the creators wound up going with fortunately involved happier outcomes, with the two beloved characters returning to life unscathed. Even the way they're brought back is similar. Thanks to her dragon siblings, Sisu ends up being resurrected.
Thank you!
Fortunately for the Disney world, siblings never failed to rescue, as Anna did the same for Elsa in Frozen 2. Remember when everyone was turned into a statue in Raya and the Last Dragon? Well, Elsa knows how they feel, since of course, she spent some time as a frozen statue herself. On a bit of a happier note, the commonalities between Elsa and Sisu's water-based powers are unmistakable. That blue glow?
This is my little sister Amba's magic. I got the glow!
Yeah, we've seen that before. How about those graceful moves across water pads and seemingly effortless soaring? Sisu has some seriously strong Elsa vibes. There's no denying it.
My big brother Pengu's magic.
There was one other pretty significant similarity between Frozen 2 and Raya and the Last Dragon, and that was the question of Raya and Elsa's sexuality. There was strong speculation that Elsa was meant to be queer, though the confirmation of this theory we hoped to get in Frozen 2 never came to pass. The idea that Raya is queer and has feelings for Namaari is definitely floating in our minds. If there is a sequel, fingers crossed, then Disney has another shot to bring the first openly queer character to the screen. This would be a huge step for the Disney franchise and broader representation of the society we actually live in. We're not the only ones rooting for this coupling, though. The voice of Raya, Kelly Marie Tran, has expressed her excitement over the speculations from audiences, since she herself thought the same doing the film and was rooting for them. Tran said she loved their relationship and hopes that if there is a sequel, we'll get to see their relationship really blossom.
Thank you, Debla. You've been very helpful.
We're already thinking of their couple names. What will they be? Namaya? Rayari? Either way, we're rooting for them. There is one other detail that makes us believe there really could be something more between Raya and Namari. And that's the fact that the scene that was rewritten the most was the meeting scene between the two when they were young. Since their reconciliation at the end is so crucial, their meeting had to have just the right feeling. The many rewrites tried to create the most authentic, vulnerable, and delicate scene they could. This kind of effort wouldn't be put in if the relationship wasn't so significant. Who knows? Maybe one of the versions included a stronger inkling of romance. All the indicators are there, and with the wild success of Raya and the Last Dragon, we might just see a defining romance come to the screen in a sequel. Our fingers are crossed for Team Namaya. Or Team Rayari. Either works.
I love you.
An act of true love will thaw a frozen heart.
Making a satisfying finale can be tough, and these Disney flicks almost ended a bit differently. Disney is known for giving audiences happy endings where everything is tied with a neat little bow. These flicks from the Mouse House originally had much different third acts than what we got in the final product. From giant sea monster battles and the end of magic to leaving the jungle, let's see which Disney movies originally had darker endings.
You wouldn't kill your old uncle.
I'm like you.
The ending of Pixar's sea monster fable Luca won over the hearts of audiences around the world and even made them weepy. What's interesting is that the film almost took a different route in its third act and would have played up the humans versus sea monster feud that looms over the film. Initially, the climax would have centered around Alberto transforming into a giant kraken, with Luca ultimately having to stand up against the humans for his misunderstood friend. The LUCA team eventually decided to lower the stakes and give the film a more simple resolution, which certainly worked in the film's favor.
They are the winners.
In the conclusion of Raya and the Last Dragon, after being shot by Namari, Sisu comes back to life, alongside all the other dragons. Surprisingly, the filmmakers initially debated whether or not Sisu and the other dragons should return, or if a resurrected Sisu should remain the last dragon. In order to stay true to the East Asian themes, the creative team decided to stick with a happier ending, and one that promoted prosperity.
Hope you don't mind. She brought some friends.
While Pixar's soul ends with Joe getting another chance to live his life on Earth and make his lifelong dreams come to fruition, that wasn't always the case. The folks at Pixar initially debated about whether or not the film should end with Joe passing on to the great beyond, instead of getting another chance on Earth. Multiple endings were thrown around, but the crew soon figured out how they could have Joe return to Earth without betraying the themes of the story or the audience.
So we all decided to give you another chance.
Onward is the rare Pixar film that is notably absent of a clear villain, but in the initial stages of the film, that wasn't the case. Story supervisor Kelsey Mann revealed that in the earlier stages of the film, there was a true villain who was guarding the hidden gem needed to bring back Ian and Barley's late father. The film's crew ended up scrapping the character as they couldn't figure out a real motive or purpose for a villainous character.
Wow, that's really terrible.
I know.
Part of Frozen's popularity can be credited to how the film handles the themes of sisterhood between Anna and Elsa. The film may not have been successful if the team at Disney decided to go with their original plans. Producer Peter Del Vecchio revealed that Anna and Elsa weren't always supposed to be sisters, as Elsa was initially planned to be the villain of the film, in an attempt to make the film more similar to its source material, Hans Christian Andersen's The Snow Queen. In another twist, the film would have ended in a giant ice battle with Anna and Elsa right in the center of it.
No, I'm not leaving without you, Elsa.
Yes, you are.
If Tangled had stayed closer to the original source material, the film would have featured Mother Gothel tricking Flynn into believing that Rapunzel was no more. In retaliation, Flynn would have thrown himself from the tower, only to be saved by a bush that caused him to lose his eyesight. Instead, the filmmakers went a different route, giving the characters a much happier ending, with Rapunzel reuniting with her parents and marrying Flynn. The film almost ended differently until the release of a certain documentary made the creative team reconsider. The film originally had the characters of Destiny, Bailey, and Hank being left behind at the marine park. After watching the SeaWorld Exposé documentary, Blackfish, the film's crew reconsidered and decided that the characters needed an ending where they were happier and truly free.
Well, I guess we'll go back home and, brush up on the anemone?
The Little Mermaid's climax almost took a darker turn, and originally featured a sequence where Ursula kidnaps Eric and attempts to drown him underneath the waves. The film's crew thought twice about the scene and deemed it too violent, which led them to change it to Eric defeating Ursula and rescuing Ariel while sailing a wrecked ship. Everyone knows the ending of Tarzan, where Jane and her father decide to abandon civilization and stay in the jungle with Tarzan. But the film's ending almost went in the exact opposite direction that would have been more similar to its source material, featuring Tarzan leaving his ape family behind and heading to human civilization to live with Jane. Directors Chris Buck and Kevin Lima ultimately decided against this, as they didn't want to have the titular hero abandon his family.
Sarabi and I didn't see you at the presentation of Simba.
That was today?
The Lion King is already one of Disney's darker animated films, but it almost had a much darker finale. The film's final showdown between Simba and Scar had initially gone down differently, as storyboards reveal that Scar successfully threw his nephew off Pride Rock before ultimately falling off himself and succumbing to the flames. Simba is ultimately shown to be alive as a tree had broken his fall. The Disney execs likely saw this ending as too intense for children and had the animation team change it to Scar being eaten alive by the hyenas. This admittedly is still pretty dark.
I've got to take you back to the Man Village.
The Man Village?
Disney's animated Jungle Book ends with Mowgli falling for a girl and following her back to the Man Village. But originally, the film didn't end there. In fact, earlier versions of the film followed Mowgli reuniting with his mother, as well as a time jump revealing that he is now at odds with the animals that raised him. If that wasn't enough, the film would have ended with Mowgli returning to the jungle to hunt down the villainous Shere Khan with a rifle.
Smokey, I need Cruz! Never mind that now. No, I need her back here. Now! Get her back!
Cars 3 ends with aspiring racer Cruz Ramirez taking Lightning McQueen's spot in the penultimate race. The film almost featured an ending where Cruz didn't get her chance to show off her racing skills, and instead had Lightning winning the race, and the film would have ended with the start of a mentorship.
Is it safe?
I guess I'll find out.
The incinerator scene in Toy Story 3 is one of the most emotionally intense sequences in any Disney movie. Director Lee Unkrich revealed that he and the team behind the film had actually made an alternate cut, where it ends right when Woody, Buzz, and the gang are about to meet their untimely end in the incinerator, cutting out the moment where they are saved by the aliens. This cut of the film was obviously never meant to be released and was only made as a practical joke. Thank goodness.
We're just here for him.
The climactic chase in Lilo and Stitch almost went down differently, initially featuring Stitch hijacking a commercial airplane and flying through the city in order to rescue Lilo, crashing into several buildings in the process. Due to tragic events that occurred during the time of the film's production, the animators came to the decision to reanimate the scene, so it wouldn't resemble the recent tragedy, with the plane being changed to a starship and the buildings into mountains. Toy Story 4 certainly concluded on an emotional note, albeit it was one that felt appropriate. Director Josh Cooley revealed that the initial ending was going to go a different route, with Woody and Bo Peep parting ways. Woody would go back to be with Bonnie, while Bo Peep gives up her status as a lost toy and goes to live with Harmony. In the end, Cooley found that this ending would go against the film's message of accepting change, and instead had Woody join Bo as a lost toy.
To infinity and beyond.
Hey! Hello! Look, I'm not supposed to be here.
Soul was so packed with references to classic Pixar films that there was a whole scene dedicated to them. But did you spot them all? Carl from Up, Riley's broccoli pizza, an alternate ending? Those are just a few of Soul's hidden secrets. Here's what you might have missed.
It says take one.
Don't, or do, okay?
Man with a van.
So, first things first. If you haven't watched Soul yet, there are some definite spoilers ahead. We can't talk about references in a Pixar movie without mentioning the iconic Pizza Planet truck. It makes an appearance in almost every Pixar film, and in Soul, it's hidden in the Hall of Everything. The Hall is basically a room filled with references to other Pixar movies. There's a Ferris wheel from Toy Story 4, the balloon and Spirit of Adventure blimp from Up, and the Axiom from WALL-E. There's even a monorail in reference to The Incredibles 2, an Aztec temple from Coco.
This isn't a dream then. You're all really out there.
And the small orange boat and whale in the sky are likely references to Finding Dory. There's also this large, strangely shaped object in the background that's probably the big rock known as Willie's Butte from Cars. Pixar's short films also get a shout out in this scene. There's a chessboard that pays homage to Jerry's Game, and a canoe that references Loop.
These souls need their spark, and that's where you come in.
When a new soul is looking for its spark, we see it give archery a shot. The fact that the soul is shooting at 3 targets reminds us of Brave, when Merida shoots at 3 targets to try and win her own hand in marriage. If you were admiring 22's home before entering the zone, you probably also spotted the Pixar ball hiding under a table. It's not colored in this scene, so it's more subtle.
Wait, are you actually helping me?
But there's no doubt that that's the ball that has made appearances in almost every Pixar film. There's a very subtle nod to Monsters, Inc. when Joe and 22 get on the subway. The number on the subway car is 2319.
2319! We have a 2319!
Which also happens to be the contaminant code featured in Monsters, Inc. whenever a child or something that has touched a child infiltrates Monstropolis. Soul has a lot in common with Inside Out, in the sense that it deals with a lot of mental health and finding purpose. Since Pete Docter also directed Inside Out, he included a few references to Riley and her family. Riley's dad works for a startup called Brang, and he wears their shirt. In Soul, an ad for the company appears on the New York City subway. The full ad is never seen, but it's definitely the same logo. A reference to Riley herself pops up in the Hall of Everything scene when Joe is trying to inspire 22's spark with some good old-fashioned pizza. On the top shelf, there's a broccoli pizza, which is too random not to reference Riley and her mom stopping for a slice.
Just smell it.
Can't. Neither can you.
What? You're right, I can't smell.
When 22 changes her voice,
this whole place is a hypothetical.
I could sound like this if I wanted to.
You might have noticed that it sounds exactly like Carl Friedrichsen from Up.
Yeah, that was good. Here, let me talk to him.
That's the voice of Ed Asner, who also voiced Carl. And it's no surprise he's included, since Soul's director Pete Docter also worked on Up. When Joe, as a cat, walks past a rat hauling a piece of pizza, the first thing that popped into your head was probably Pizza Rat. Pete Docter included this moment, which references the famous rat caught on camera in New York City, to forever immortalize him in film. It's also a bit of a cheeky reference to a just as famous Pixar rat, Remy from Ratatouille. Another reference hidden in the Hall of Everything is the Pixar lamp. Known as Luxo Jr., the lamp that you probably know best from the Pixar title screen actually starred in its very own short film in 1986. But in the Hall, we can see it inspiring a new soul. If you're a pro at Pixar references, you might already know that A113 appears in a lot of Pixar films. It's not a reference to just one movie, but to the famous Cal Arts classroom where many Pixar alumni studied. In Soul, there's a blank street sign towards the right side of the screen in the Hall of Everything that reads A113. We're going to go back to the Hall of Everything for a moment to point out all the Inside Out references there, because there are just so many that are specific to Pete Docter's previous Pixar film.
Yeah, it's good. What happened with the playoffs?
There are a few references to San Francisco, like the Golden Gate Bridge and a trolley, but there are also some more direct references to Riley's mind. It looks like there's a princess castle in the back, which gets demolished in Inside Out when Riley grows older and forgets about it. There's also a bulldozer which was used to push forgotten memories into the memory dump. Even the trampoline could be a reference to the one Riley jumped on with her parents. Soul also contains a subtle reference to Walt Disney himself.
Where are we?
In Dr. Borgenson's Hall of You, we see a statue of the famed psychologist where he's standing and pointing to his right arm while his left holds a child's hand. This pose is just like the partner's statue found at Disneyland and Magic Kingdom, where Walt Disney points down Main Street while holding Mickey Mouse's hand. 22's home is full of name tags from previous mentors, but there are 3 names in particular that are significant to Disney and Pixar fans. The first is Joe Grant, a Disney animation legend who worked on classic films like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and even helped Pete Docter on Monsters, Inc. The second is Joe Ranft, a Disney legend who won an Academy Award for the Toy Story screenplay and was also the voice of Heimlich in A Bug's Life.
How about the nice, tasty worm on a stick?
Last but not least is Jack Kirby, who was a famous comic book artist, writer, and editor at Marvel and helped create iconic characters like Spider-Man and Captain America. If the Lost Souls and the Zone remind you of something, you're probably thinking of the memory dump from Inside Out. The darkness represented in this scene is very similar to the kind of darkness Lost Souls experience in Soul. Both films teach us that having compassion for these negative feelings can help you learn to coexist with them and even appreciate them.
Nothing. I just need to fill out that last box. I give up.
Terry might have been trying to get Joe to move on like he's supposed to, but there's no true villain in Soul. In fact, you might even say that Joe is his own villain, just like how 22's fear to live is what's really standing in their way. But according to Pete Docter, there almost was a more villainous character. Daveed Diggs voices Paul from The Barbershop, who basically just pesters Joe. But he was almost more of an antagonist who would have been a bigger obstacle to Joe's success. But in the end, Joe calling out Paul for being jealous was all he really needed to do to defeat this naysayer.
He's just criticizing me to cover up the pain of his own failed dreams.
And he had enough of a challenge dealing with his own insecurities and the pressures of life, so a true villain was never really needed. Just like there was almost a villain, Soul almost had an entirely different ending. Pete Docter revealed that there were a few different ideas floating around about how to properly end the movie. Some of them were funny and some of them were sad, but one of the ones they almost chose involved Joe actually moving on to the great beyond. But just like the Jerrys, they decided to give him a second chance at life and end the film on an inspiring note. Now that Joe really understands what it means to live, he gets to go and give it another shot. Pixar always likes to hide a reference to their next film in their movies, and it's usually the kind of thing you don't really notice until watching it again. One of the Easter eggs for Soul appeared in Onward, where you can see a record of the Dorothea Williams Quartet. In the case of Soul, this reference actually appeared early on in one of the trailers. LUCA is scheduled for release in 2021, and when Joe and 22 walk past a travel agency, you can spot a poster for Porto Rosso, a place you can get to by flying LUCA Airlines. Any other hidden secrets you spotted in Soul? And what did you think of the movie? Let us know in the comment section below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.